stories.
As a female who has been playing World of Warcraft for 15 years now, I've met a lot of creeps, but only a few have made me feel unsafe. To start off, I've always had a laptop since I was in high school, a luxury back then. I worked hard to earn enough money to buy one. My mom almost took my money I earned for drugs, but luckily money I made in tips were in cash, so it was easier to hide it from her. At first my mom was mad I bought myself a laptop, but she soon forgot like everything. My dad could care less, and my older brother already had his own, so I started playing World of Warcraft with him at 14, and back then, girls were unheard of. So I got the usual creeps who usually backed off after hearing my age, or they were young too, but not this guy. This guy loved that I was underage. I was about 16 and used to creepy guys at this point, no longer a noob at the game or fending off the creeps. It was no longer a surprise. A new guy in the guild started hitting on me. Now I was 16, dumb, young, horny, and stupid, but I knew I wasn't going to find love on World of Warcraft, where you knew no one in real life. Plus, I had the ultimate crush on a guy I could not have, because he was my brother's best friend. But in my mind, back then, I only wanted him, so it was easy to turn guys down, despite being desperate as hell for one guy. But all of that changed after my brother's friend went off to college. I had a part-time job with my brother's friend, but girls at work surrounded him and I became demoralized. I'd never find love. Cue 19-year-old guy on World of Warcraft who made me feel wanted. I had a camera phone, so I could send and post pictures at that age. And back then, I mostly used Facebook, MySpace, and PhotoBucket. I lost a lot of weight my sophomore year, so I posted confidently bikini pics and sexy pictures, thinking I'd lure the attention of my brother's friend, whom was 19. So when this guy who was also 19 liked me, it didn't faze me. He looked the part in his photos, and his younger brother was my age, so I thought he was extremely attractive in his photos, and even proved it was him in his pictures by holding items I asked for. He started paying my World of Warcraft subscription, which in the long run I realized it was to get my home address and my real name. I was so stupid and heartbroken over my brother's friend. Years of teaching myself online safety and the ability to be strong against flirts was all but lost in the fog. We'd talk for hours on Ventrilo, and he'd make me feel pretty. I was completely blinded by this point. He sent me gifts, and I didn't even question how he had my address. Then he offered to drive and pick me up. As only then I suddenly get cold feet. I had a good friend on World of Warcraft, someone my brother met at PAX and joined the guild, and is still one of my best friends to this day. He was 6 years older than me, but never creeped on me. Was more like the protective brother I lacked. He caught on to it through conversation, and was my words of wisdom in a time I was lacking any of my own. He saw something was fishy when I could not. I told my friend I was scared to meet him because dumb teenager logic. I thought he would not like me. My friend chimed in that I shouldn't meet anyone off of the internet at my age. I told him about the gifts, and I swear I have never been scolded like this in my life, not even by my own parents. But he always cared like that. He wondered why I would give my address to someone I have never met, and the expensive gifts I got were not something the average 19-year-old could afford. None of this ever clicked for me, of course, because I was lonely and trying to prove, I don't know, to myself, my crush, or something, I could get a boyfriend. Like that, I told the guy it wasn't wise to meet in person, and my parents said I wasn't allowed to. That's when it went dark. At first it was pestering over and over, guilting me over gifts he gave me, and encouraging me to defy my parents. While he kept bothering me, it never once occurred to me he'd lose his shit. While my friend was worried shitless about the guy having my address, going as far as to drive the 11 hours to my house and explain the situation to my dad, as I refused to tell him out of fear of getting in trouble at the time, all while taking his spring break in my state instead of his own with his friends. There's a reason he's still one of my best friends. He has a little sister of his own as well, and she's my age, so his protective nature is natural. Eventually, he made me block the guy, and that was that. This guy was pissed off. He'd go on different accounts to accuse me of gold digging and using him. Luckily, my friend was smart enough and had the foresight to change my World of Warcraft password, and even paid for my account for me taking this guy off it entirely, as one of this guy's threats was to delete my account. But it did not end there. It got worse, as he'd constantly find ways to message me and tell me how horrible I was. Until about a month had passed. I was walking home from school, about 2-mile walk in wealthy suburbs of New England, which I had done for years. Many kids did it as well. It was a very safe town with no crime in it or surrounding towns. Without second thought, I took off with my backpack, put my headphones in, and started my 20-minute walk home. It was cold, so I had my earmuffs over my headphones, only drowning out sound more too. I swear, if I could talk to myself as a kid, I'd probably just slap myself for stupidity, because World of Warcraft guy knew I walked home every day. As I talked about it, he knew my address, and I never thought twice. I was on the back roads walking home, and honestly, easy to map from my school to home, as it was pretty straightforward with only one turn. At halfway home, in between songs, I heard a vague crunching sound of tires rolling over gravel on the road slowly. I turned around to see a tinted black car that you couldn't see much of the person in front. I jogged out of the driveway I was standing in front of, assuming it was waiting to turn in, but it didn't turn in. The roads were dead, and it didn't make sense for him not to go around. I swear, the saying that you go cold when you are terrified is absolutely true. It could have been a summer's day at 95 degrees, and my bones would have been cold. My heart just sank, and my breathing was uncontrollable. I felt like I had no control over my body as I realized this guy was following me. My blood truly ran cold, and my hands shook as tears formed and my skin felt tight. It only got worse as the second time I turned my head to see the car stop. I stopped. My world stopped. I couldn't stop staring, just froze and breathing like all my school books were on my chest, crying silently. My eyes hurt, with no tears or sound, as I just stood there. The door opened after what felt like hours, but only seconds, maybe a minute, and it was in fact him. It was the attractive guy from the photos, not a catfish, but something seemed different. At first I thought it was his angry expression, but soon realized he was definitely not 19. more like 30 plus. I could barely think over the loud sound of my heart racing as I stood frozen in place. I thought I was about to puke as I just stood there, and he spoke to me. He told me to get in his car or he'd light my house on fire and kill my dog. I honestly could not move. I could not reach my phone. And, like some magic, we both failed to notice the little old lady on her porch watching this play out. Suddenly, I hear her yell, "Get away from that little girl right there, before I kill you, you son of a bitch." We both turned to meet her eyes. Pissed off, small lady about 60 or 70 with white hair. I think she noticed me frozen in fear as she told me to get over to her quickly. Like that, I ran over to her, tossing off my heavy brick of a backpack. It was obvious he was unsure what to do next as he stood there and watched me run over to her. Must have been a sight, this tiny, thin old lady standing in front of a teenage girl yelling at this man to go away, like that survivor number 2 joined the battle as her husband stepped out, guy who looked like he had been through a war or two, with a shotgun, of all things, and booming voice, gun pointed, saying, "I have shot and killed men for less reason. You better fucking leave now." He got back into his car and drove off as I simply collapsed. All that fear just came out as I cried harder and harder as my brain sifted through the past few months of mistakes. After calming me down enough to speak in non-hyperventilating words, she asked me if I knew him. I told her kind of, but only online, from a video game, not real life. Of course, explaining it wasn't easy. She got on the phone with the school counselor, her daughter apparently, and told her my name. I was well known to her daughter, ironically, but it was only 250 or less kids in the school, and the town itself was small. Many staff at our school had family in town. Kids at school there were related to each other by their own children or their siblings' children. It was the kind of town you didn't leave. By a certain age, you were stuck there. So honestly, it seems ironic, but entirely not a huge surprise. The counselor was well aware of my family and my mom's drug addiction, as child services had been involved a few times. She came by in 10 minutes to pick me up and ask me a ton of questions, of course, knowing I did not want to involve the police as I was scared of being taken away from my parents again. We weren't rich, but we were more well off than many. Though my mom worked, my dad kept my mom on a tight budget to keep her from buying prescriptions from Canada she wasn't prescribed. She knew all of this and knew, though rough, I was better off than foster care, which was a gamble with losing odds at best, plus 2 more years and I'd be off to college anyway, so we didn't involve the cops, but she made me promise to take the bus every day and to inform my dad of the situation. She also called my dad at work to inform him and had a teacher make sure I got on the bus every day until I graduated even. Really sucked, but I understand. If it ended there, it would have been nice, but there's still a bit more, and I'm sorry for the length and the grammar. It's late night, and I'm recalling from memory and typing on my phone. 2 days after this, my dad had to fly out for business. My brother was off at college, so it left me and my high mom who promised my dad she'd stay sober while he was gone, but I was used to helping her while she was high. Was like taking care of a child. But I was on edge, as ever. Creak Inn, that big house from the 60s, cats stir at night, and dogs barking outside set me on edge. I barely slept. My friend from World of Warcraft called me every night, making sure I was okay for the past month. I lived in the middle of the woods, next to a huge river in my backyard, so there was still a lot of wildlife outside in the dead silence of cold months. Running water is an important source of water when lakes freeze. I had been used to all of the bumps in the night, cats coming and going and dogs barking at every animal in the yard, but it all seemed new to me as I laid in bed trying to drown out my fears. The house I grew up in was a 6-bedroom house. I had a little sister too, but she stayed with my grandma in another state per court order while I was allowed to choose due to her only being 9 and me 16. The other rooms were used as a game room, an office for my dad, and a guest room for my sister when she visited with my grandma and she had a room. So, in a large house like that, in the middle of the woods, it was scary to virtually be alone because my mom was completely defenseless because she was high. I was letting my last cat inside for the night, and at the end of the long driveway between my neighbor and our house was parked a black car. I quickly shut the door and locked it after my cat got inside. I made sure all 5 doors were locked and even put cardboard on the glass doors to the pool. I don't know, hoping if he broke them, it would delay him if the car was his. I went through the house and turned off all of the lights and got all of my cats into one room so I knew they were safe. Here's the thing about my dog. He's untrained for the most part, but was basically a giant lab puppy in his mind. But he growled at strangers, not barked like animals. We had to keep him inside if we had guests, but he never bit anyone. And if you spent enough time around him, he'd eventually accept you. Also, he didn't growl at all strangers either, so he wasn't the most reliable guard dog either, but he was big and had a deep bark. I mulled over what to do as I sat there in the dark with my dog waiting for a shadow to pass by the window. I eventually went upstairs to my mom's room and woke her up from her sleeping pill slumber, groggy and still kinda high. She didn't quite grasp what I was telling her until I started crying. She sorta sobered up and asked me to get her some coffee, so I did, all while I'm watching my dog's every move because I knew he could sense something before I did. As my mom sobered, her fear in her eyes grew. Eventually, she got the idea to call my neighbors and ask them if they knew the car. The neighbors said that they didn't know whose car it was, and 2 men went out of their house to check the car out. The car was empty. At closer inspection, though, they noticed it was a newer car, a Lexus, and in the passenger seat was a laptop. The car was locked, but with a flashlight you could see somewhat into the tinted windows. They never told us why, but something they saw in the car prompted them to call the local sheriff. Only one, and he lived in town, sorta. We were too small to have a police department. He drove over about 15 minutes later, ran the plates, and asked the houses around about it. Apparently, it was a rental car from Ohio, and he was calling to see who rented it, but the offices were closed, I think. He stuck around his car for about an hour until someone came out of the woods and ran back in as the cop turned his spotlight on him. I couldn't see what he was pointing at with his light. He called for backup, as 3 other cops showed up in 5 minutes from the neighboring town and highway patrol, at which a lady cop got out and asked to speak with her and call my counselor from school to explain who that might be. During the search, the police found something I didn't think about checking. The basement door was not just unlocked, but open. It's never unlocked, so I didn't even think to check it, as our backyard floods in the spring due to beaver dams, and it's got extra seals and stuff to prevent the basement from flooding again, but that stuff sealing it, which was mostly sandbags and stuff, were set aside, but the door at the bottom of the stairs was locked. Still, though, it had some damage, like someone tried picking. He had access to half the basement that was storage. The door between the section was like a front door, as in the summer my dad left the hatch open to dry out the basement and adjust pool settings, as it was basically the pool house and the cats loved it, so it also had a few cat beds. The section that led upstairs was locked from the inside, and the wall and the door were not drywall and cheap door, but lock and key, heavy door and wall was brick. My dad confirmed he had not left it open. My suspicions that black car was his was pretty much confirmed. As we walked through the house to make sure everything was still safe, the female officer got on my laptop as they searched the woods. I gave her everything I had, his photos, username, and she even checked to see if his credit card was still on my account, but it wasn't. But the last few digits were. She then asked to take my laptop for a few days, as she thought she could get some good evidence from it. I asked her to please not damage it and return it as soon as possible, because I used it a lot before smartphones. It was all I had. After a few hours and onlooking neighbors had gone to bed, the cops came back empty-handed, but left a cop outside our house and towed the guy's car away. From what the lady cop told me, what permitted such fear was in the car there were 2 guns, some sort of rope, and handcuffs, and the guy who ran back into the dense woods was wearing a winter ski mask. So eventually, I tried to lay down and go to sleep, and I'm pretty sure I was going to call out sick tomorrow, and kept all my cats inside for the day. I was too restless to sleep. Every sound made me so scared. My mom slept with the dog in her room, and my cats slept in my room most nights by choice, as my room was usually the warmest. At around 3:30 a.m., I heard a knock on the back door, and a guy say, "Undercover police officer, open up." I was still awake as I walked downstairs to make out a guy standing in the dark with a gun. As he saw me, he demanded I let him in now, as he needed to speak with me. Something felt off. The guy's voice seemed forced, like someone purposely making their voice deeper. And why was he at the back door? So I turned on a light outside, and sure enough, it was him. I just screamed. As quickly as I screamed, he started hitting the door hard. Wasn't a very loud horror movie scream, but more like a gasp scream. I don't think the fear in my body had a loud scream to let out, but the banging was pretty loud. As I ran to the front to see if the officer was still outside, he was, but he wasn't getting out of his car. I didn't want to run outside, as I'm not a fast runner, so I turned the porch light on, and a couple of times, but still nothing. After a minute, my dog came bolting down the door, barking and growling and foaming at the mouth. Soon followed my mom, who yelled she had a gun. She didn't, but bluff is bluff. Somehow, during all this, the cop outside had snuck around back and had his gun pointed at him, yelling to put his gun down. I wasn't needed in court for the trial, and my statement was enough. Come to find out, he wasn't even American. The car was rented under his friend's name, and after all was done, he was deported back to Canada. I assumed something with his passport would prevent him from coming back to the United States, as the cop reassured me he couldn't come back to the United States now. I don't know exactly what he was charged with, but I think my dad said aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, and something else. And it also turned out he was 32 years old, not 19, so I assume me, being a minor, carried a charge. I am female, and I was kind of a dweeb in middle school. I was the quiet girl, a label that kind of followed me all the way through grade school and eventually would through half of high school. I was picked on for it to some degree, but ultimately people ignored me, which I decided was preferable to being harassed every class period. I was also not very into girly things, having a preference for video games and drawing, which kept my pool of like-minded friends pretty trimmed down. I was too shy to approach any boys in pursuit of friendship or whatever else, so I mostly stuck with a pair of chicks who, despite going their own ways and becoming homecoming queens in the following years, really enjoyed my awkward and quirky company at the time. I believe I was in 8th grade, and Valentine's Day rolled around. Being an insufferable nerd, I initially didn't give it much thought. Our school did this silly thing in which you could, in the days before Valentine's Day, order carnations and have them delivered to other students anonymously or otherwise. Needless to say, I wasn't expecting one. But in first period that day, I was sitting down for roll call, and the flower delivery person came in for their rounds. To my great surprise, my name was called. I was so floored that at first I didn't speak up, assuming I had heard the name wrong or something. But sure enough, after a few pointing fingers from the rest of my class, I was the confused but flattered recipient of a nice peach-colored carnation. I had no fucking clue who the sender was. By lunchtime, I was itching to see if either one of my gossipy, know-everything girlfriends had any leads. They were too surprised to see me sit down with my lunch sporting a carnation, though not in an insulting way, and were very keen on getting to the bottom of it. They were thrilled to think there might be some shy boy with an interest in me, and after the initial shock, I was too. They did a bunch of asking around that lunch period, and by the end of lunch, had a potential candidate. His name was Josh. I did not know him very well, but I had a couple of classes with him, namely art. I believe he was also in my math class. He too was a very quiet, lonesome, nerdy type, and I knew he was into video games, if only from the art project we were doing at the time. He had made something with the Super Smash Bros. Theme, and I thought it was pretty fucking cool. He had glasses, long curly blonde hair that he kept up in a ponytail, and wore all black pretty regularly. Immediately, my mind wandered through the prospect of having him as a boyfriend. going home with him after school to play video games and draw and whatever else two dorks would find interesting. My friends had concluded it was him after talking to some guys who knew him, claiming that he had said he'd bought a peach carnation anonymously for someone, though they didn't know who. It seemed sufficient information, though, so we all got it in our heads that he was the culprit. The following few days I expected him to eventually come forward. I watched him fondly from a distance in my art class, though not obsessively, and certainly never had the balls to go ask him about the flower. What would I ask anyway? What if my friends and I were wrong in our detective work? That'd be pretty awkward, and being the socially anxious creature I was, not even the prospect of having my first boyfriend could prod me towards something so potentially devastating. So I waited, with much patience and empathy, for my fellow socially awkward penguin. Weeks passed, and I was never approached, despite how exciting it originally felt. It drifted to the back of my mind, and I quietly accepted that we were probably wrong. Either way, it seemed unlikely that my Valentine was ever going to fess up. However, he was. I eventually had better things to think about, just about forgetting about the incident altogether. Fast forward a few weeks, and I walk into a circle of the popular kids in one of my classes whispering about something. My seat being where it is, I could hear everything that was said. They seemed pretty disturbed, and were talking about some quiet guy who had left notes in all of his classes that they found. The notes were essentially weird, cryptic poems entailing his desires, plans to shoot up the school and subsequently kill himself. I never personally saw the notes, but it was very concerning, and as the conversation went on, it became undeniably clear who they were referring to. So when they started trying to remember his name, with repeated failures, I finally spoke up. "Josh?" I attempted timidly, which was met by several surprised looks, and finally, "Yeah, it's Josh, that's his name." I felt sick and wanted to cry. I don't remember all of the details on how things proceeded from there, but eventually I was convinced that no one that knew about this was planning on going to any sort of authority about it. I don't believe I told any other students about what I had heard, hesitant to start some stupid rumor, but I did tell the school counselor and my parents because I was genuinely scared for my safety. Afterwards, I never heard any follow-up to the whole ordeal, but I never saw Josh again in my life. I assume he was expelled. Frustratingly, none of the details were ever solidly confirmed, but the possibilities still haunt me to this day. Perhaps it's stupid and overly empathetic of me, but I sometimes wonder if his failed attempt to finally make a connection with someone on Valentine's Day was the final straw for him, driving him to thoughts of homicide and suicide. I hardly feel guilty about it, but it's just another aspect of the whole ordeal that makes me absolutely nauseated to think about. So I just started my first job. It's a fry cook job at a royal fast food chain in America. My first days started off fantastic until I met my male manager. At first he seemed nice, way better than the female manager. He laughed and joked around with me and the other employees and generally made me feel pretty comfortable at a new place. Fast forward a few hours after meeting him, and shit hit the fucking fan very fast. I feel like to get the whole creepy factor, I should probably first describe what this guy looks like. He's tall and greasy, fat, has glasses, pimply, grayish black buzz cut, has glasses. He looks like a total neckbeard. He also talks like Renee from Storage Wars. Okay, so I'm getting off topic again, but I digress. This manager is a creepy dude. My first shift with him started off swell, like I said, but after the main manager left, it started off innocent enough. He asked if I liked mini golf. I wanted to be polite, and I told him yes. Then he proceeds to ask me to go mini golfing with him like 4 times. I'm a minor, and I told him I don't think my parents would be very comfortable with that. His response, "We can just tell them that Sarah, the female manager, is coming too." I brushed this off because maybe the guy is just lonely. No biggie, right? Wrong. The next day, another woman, Hannah, was training me. She's about 50 and very sweet. I was making the sandwiches pretty quickly, and she was excited. She said that I was doing a great job, and that she hoped I'd stay around for a while because I was making her day brighter. Then the manager came around and says, "I hope you stay too. We need more cute girls around here." I quickly excused myself to go to the ladies' room to text my boyfriend and tell him what had just happened. Within 5 minutes, he was at the store. He asked to speak with the manager and explained to them that one of his friends, me, was being treated inappropriately by a male manager. The creeper then comes out to the back where all of us were, standing and talking, and begins to flip shit. He goes into full-on rage mode, saying shit like, "If anyone thinks I'm trying to steal their fucking girlfriend, I have a fucking fiancé." Then starts showing us pictures of some random girl who is clearly not his fiancé. I clocked out and went home. I wasn't too scared since my boyfriend made sure they knew someone was having a problem. I figured if anything happened, I could tell him and he would solve it. The next day I went into work. Same boring shit. Creepy manager showed up halfway through. It got slow and we were all bullshitting again, and he came into the back and joined our conversation. I was talking about my boyfriend with Hannah, and she was laughing and calling me cute for blushing when I was talking about him. The manager then says, "Teal hair, don't care. You should really smile more. Makes you look even cuter than you usually do. You look so innocent." I walked into the back to get on my phone. I come back, and the manager is standing there. "So, how old are you?" Stupid me answers, 17, but I'll be 18 in like a month. "I hope you're still here in a month. We can go out and do something for your birthday." At this point, I tried to walk away, but now he was blocking my path. Luckily, Hannah called me, and he moved. The entire day, I work until close. I could feel his beady eyes staring at me when I went outside with another worker so he could have a smoke break and I could get away from the creep. He walked over with his phone. On the screen was a picture of an Asian porn star in a schoolgirl outfit. "This is the kind of girl I'm into," he said. I tried to shuffle away slowly, but once again he was blocking my path. The guy who was outside noticed I was uncomfortable and stepped in between us and said, "Bruh, she's not even hot. Plus, she's got fake tits." I tried to get away again, but it didn't work. The manager then said something that makes my skin crawl, even to think about. "Yeah, but it's the face, the innocence. Something about taking advantage of someone just does something for me." I would like to say that I noped the fuck out, quit, called the owner, Anything that might have even been a little bit useful, but I didn't. I finished my shift, listened to this dude talk about all the sex he had when he was my age and how I shouldn't stay with one person for too long. I need to mix it up a bit or else I'll get bored. On my way home, I almost cried. I felt so disgusting. I went in and the next day hoping to speak with a different manager about him, but he was the only one there. I uncomfortably worked my shift while trying to avoid him as much as possible. Eventually, he managed to corner me again, this time asking me about the ring on my thumb and my boyfriend. Somehow the conversation topic changed to the future, and if I ever planned on getting married. Obviously I said yes to try to deter him, but he pressed on. I told him, maybe I'll end up with a woman, you never know. He then began to flip shit again. He said, don't ever end up being a lesbian. That's horrible. At least be bisexual. That way guys can have a little bit of fun too. Don't be selfish. I rolled my eyes and walked away. Later on, the other worker went on break. During breaks, we aren't supposed to stay in the store, so I guess he left or whatever. But I was alone with the creep, and I started cleaning so that when 11 came, I'd go home faster. He then tried to have a conversation with me about what fun I thought was okay at my age. I quickly told him about how I was waiting until marriage because I have too much to focus on right now with college and stuff. He said, come on, a little bit of fun isn't gonna be too bad. You just need to feel pleasure. Then you'll understand. I was too scared to do anything. So I just went into the ladies' room and felt really uncomfortable. That night, my mom was picking me up. It was 11:30 and I was waiting outside of the store for her so I could just leave. I was waiting outside for like 2 minutes when the manager comes outside. Come wait inside. A pretty girl like you should not be standing out here alone. I told him that I lived down the street and my mom would be here in a minute. He said, I can always drive you home. I'll never let a woman walk home. It's against my moral. I then took out my phone and told my mom to hurry the fuck up and come ASAP. Her contact photo came up. It was a picture of us at graduation. The manager says, is that your mom? She's really cute, but I still think you're cuter. I called my mom, and of course, she didn't fucking answer. Are you nervous? Come here, give me a hug. I'm sure she'll be here in a minute. I never ran so fast in my fucking life. I sprinted out the door, away from him, right as my mom showed up. Fast forward to last week, I was working till close alone with him. I texted my boyfriend about how uncomfortable I was, and he came to the store and waited in the parking lot for me. When suddenly, the creepy manager gets a text from the main manager cussing him off for not doing his count. He freaks out, throwing a tantrum like a child, yelling, kicking stuff, the whole 9 yards. I keep cleaning my shit, not wanting to get involved. He went into the freezer at 11. I did all the dishes and mopped up until about 11:40. He finally comes out of the freezer crying. I said, fuck this shit, dude. I'm done right now, alright? And I clocked out. My boyfriend was still waiting outside, so I walked over to his car and kissed him and shit, when suddenly I looked up. The manager was staring at us. My boyfriend drove me to my car and urged me to quit. So creepy, Neckbeard manager, please, leave me the fuck alone. If you're new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.